should sit. So, my name is Antony Oluoch. I'm from Pan-Africa ILGA. It's quite possibly the biggest LGBT organization in Africa, and we have a membership of 106 organizations from across the continent. And what we do is we advocate for the rights of gay, lesbian, bi, and trans and intersex people in Africa. Our office is based in Johannesburg, and we are the main reason why we're here is because there are people in the African continent who are completely disenfranchised, who are completely not taken care of because of the fact that they are, lesbian or gay or bisexual or intersex or trans, and that's something that we just can't let happen as human beings. And being here has been really eye-opening. It has been incredibly the stories that I'm hearing from people, the stories that I'm hearing from people all over the world, where people are being criminalized for being HIV positive, where people have spent 4 years in prison because they are HIV positive. It's absolutely not right. And this is happening in Canada, but then there are laws in the African continent which criminalize people, not just for being HIV positive, but for loving who they love, for loving differently, for being different. So, for example, in Kenya, there's a petition for decriminalization of homosexuality, and that is something that is happening all over the continent now. So what we do at Pan-Africa ILGA, we advocate for the rights of the people who are not talked about, the people who are the voice of the voiceless, so to speak. And we are going through our strategic planning session. Our strategic plan, the old strategic plan comes to an end at the end of this year, and we will be coming towards a new strategic plan. And one of the things that has come up is a focus on youth and a focus on Francophone countries. So we realized that in most of programming in Africa, there is not really the Francophone countries are often not talked about and not really engaged. And I'm glad that I'm here with COC because we did a completely bilingual training on human rights mechanism. You were there, Joyce, and it was absolutely amazing, where you had people from all over from Burkina Faso, from Mali, who attended, and that was great. So there's going to be a much more focus on Francophone countries. There's going to be much more focus on youth. We just finished a conference last month, and the focus of that conference was LGBT youth. And so basically that is going to be our focus in the next 2-3 years to come. So that is Pan-Africa ILGA in a nutshell. I'm not going to talk for 15 minutes actually. So if you have any question about the African continent and the LGBT movement in the African continent,
are there any questions already? And otherwise, I have a question. Shall I start? Yeah, sure. Some of the work that you do also focuses on the regional mechanisms. I'm just curious if you would like to share something about how the African Commission is a space that is or isn't helpful in advancing the human rights of LGBTI African people.
Yeah. So the African Commission on Human and People's Rights is great. Let's have a conversation. So we do work with the regional mechanisms. We work with the UPR, the Universal Periodic Review. We work with the United Nations Human Rights Council. But one of the other organizations that we focus on is the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. So it is a space where LGBT activists have actually been in and engaged with the commissioners and try and advance the rights of LGBT people. It is it's an interesting space. It's one of those spaces where you have commissioners who are completely homophobic, and like for instance, the Coalition of African Lesbians has been trying to get observer status in the African Commission. They did get it, but it is being challenged by the African Union. So it's quite an interesting space, and it is really important though. It is very important because it's the one space where activists can actually engage with people from their states, with really powerful people in their countries, in their states, and people who represents government. So it's a really important space, and I guess that's the answer to the question. It's really important, and the focus of that particular space is something that needs to be done.
Maybe just as a follow-up question, I'm just curious, like how is it different to work with states in an African mechanism that's specifically African compared to the UN mechanism that is not always generally supported by all states? Could you say a little bit more? This is knowledge that I know about this, but I just hope that you can share a little with others how that's different and how that has a different impact on how you engage with states.
I don't know if any of you have ever heard of this, but there's a rhetoric in most of Africa that homosexuality is a Western import. So they say that, oh, this is what the white people brought in. So working in the UN, for instance, is usually considered to be us trying to propagate the Western agenda. So and working within the African Union, the African Commission for Human and People's Rights, is the difference is because of that. The UN is very international. The UN Human Rights Council is very international. Wow, it's happening. And the African Commission is very homegrown. It's much more African. It's easier for us to make an impact in working within that movement, working within that environment, than it is for us to make an impact in the UN. But I know that the UN has been there. I've heard some people talk about the UN here and saying how it's not really impactful in advancing anybody's rights. But the difference within working in the UN and working in the African Commission is just that there is a lot more uptake of the ideas that we are trying to push through, the rights that we are trying to champion in the African Commission than it is at the UN.
You said that your focus areas now are going to be on youth and then in Francophone countries. But my question is more about what challenges do you anticipate that you will come across when you start to target youth? Because most often working with youth is considered easier because they're the younger generation and it is, they're supposed to not have the same mindset, the culturally ingrained thoughts as people of an older generation. So, but not taking that into account, do you anticipate any challenges when working with young people?
Working with youth is actually, especially in the African continent, is not easier because, and considering the work that we do, the rights that we're trying to champion, working on LGBT issues with the youth is not easier. It's actually a lot harder because there is that rhetoric of us trying to, and it's really stupid really, but we're told that we're trying to recruit people into homosexuality. So that makes it really difficult for us to target youth. So that's one of the challenges that we anticipate, that most most states, most countries, most organizations will not want to work with anyone under the age of 18. And we cannot put our heads in the sand and assume that these people are not engaging with each other sexually. We cannot do that. But that is a major challenge. How are we going to engage with people under the age of 18? And they are the youth. They are the people that we should be targeting. So that's going to be difficult as a challenge. The other challenge really is how are we going to one of the challenges that we've actually been looking at is how are we going to reach youth in some of these countries like say Uganda or Kenya or Nigeria. How are we going to get in touch with them? How are we going to access them with the services that we're given?
How do you think that it will develop like in the next 3, 5, 10 years?
I hope it's going to be really good. But that's what we all hope for. But I mean the steps, the incredible steps that have happened in the last 5-10 years have shown that there is a move towards having a better access to human rights for LGBT people. 5 years ago, for instance, it would be incredibly difficult for a gay man or a lesbian woman to stand in public and declare that they are gay or they're lesbian in most countries in Africa. Now it's not completely ideal, but it is possible for people to be outwardly gay. But in 5 years, 10 years, I'm hoping we are fighting towards getting the laws changed, getting people not criminalized because of the fact that they're gay or lesbian, getting the HIV criminalization laws changed as well, allowing for people to exist basically. So that's what we're hoping in 5-10 years. I don't know how it's going to be like, but we're going to fight like hell to make it happen.
So what have been the most contributing factors to making that difference? As you said, 5 years ago it wouldn't have been so easy for an activist to stand up and be open and visibly supportive of LGBTI people. So what in your view is changing, or what can you see is shifting that has brought the movement or the LGBTI cause, if you can call it that, this far? And of course, that's a generalization for how many countries? 54? So, I mean, Africa's not a country. Let's just remind ourselves.
So, in the country of Africa, the main thing that has actually changed what's happening is access to information. One of the things that I always say is that when there you go, someone else with my tattoo. One of the things I always say is that when people don't understand something, the first reaction for them is usually fear. And when they fear it, the first reaction to that is violence. So when we put ourselves out there, when someone like me goes on TV and says, okay, so here I am, I'm queer, I don't have horns on my head, the whole visibility of it, which can be a double-edged sword, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But when we put ourselves out there, when we make ourselves visible, that really makes a huge difference. It allows people to see you for who you are. It allows people to see you as a human being. And that has happened a lot in the country of Africa, in the continent. It has happened a lot in many parts of the continent, and that for me is the main factor in changing people's minds, changing people's hearts, changing the way people see you as a human being. So that would be that.
I can come up with questions.
Come up with another one.
No,
Let's have a
yeah.
conversation.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm just really conscious of how Western media like to portray Africa, and I mean, just continuing on that the country of Africa imagery, and also combined with the fact that media are only interested in news that's bad news. So I think this is affecting LGBTI communities in different countries in Africa as well. We notice this as COC, that it's very hard to bring to the attention of media when something is happening in a country that is not Uganda, for example, and to bring good news. So tell us a little bit about the good news. Do you have some, where do you see really interesting advances happening in countries that we are a more informed audience, I think, than the average Dutch citizen. But what are interesting stories that we should keep an eye out for? You know, what's happening? You know, Mozambique or Malawi. Where are things shifting dramatically, or that we can expect fairly soon? And this is maybe a difficult question but if you. We want to hear some good news as well, not just the teary little child in the desert, you know?
In the country of Africa. I really love that. There have been quite a lot of advances in human rights field in Africa. Kenya, for instance, has actually allowed for registration of an organization with the words gay and lesbian. They had the Gay and Lesbian Human Rights Commission tried to register as an NGO, and they were denied registration because of the fact that they have the words gay and lesbian in the name. So they went to court, and the court ruled that they can actually register. The state is actually appealing that ruling from the court, which is, I'm sure it's something that you can't actually fathom, because it's ridiculous. Why refuse registration because this organization has the word gay and lesbian in it? But it is happening, and that shift is changing. Transgender people are allowed to change their names in their documents, which is great. Botswana also allowed for registration of organizations with the word the Lehabibo, the lesbians and gays of Botswana. So that was allowed as well, and I think the state is also challenging that as well. So I mean, there are strides that are happening. There are some happy things that are going on. There was the first, again in Kenya, the first gay pride in a refugee camp happened in Kakuma, which is one of the biggest refugee camps in Kenya. And that happened, although with it there was some security concerns for people who were in the camp. But things are changing. There is some happy news. As much as the laws in some countries like Uganda and Nigeria are trying to put us down, but things are happening. We are making some headway, and hopefully very soon things are going to be different.
Thanks, Anthony. And just wondering, do states look at one another when they see these steps happening, like in Botswana you mentioned, but also recently Cabo Verde being the first country to actually join an international coalition of supportive ally states to LGBTI people, the Equal Rights Coalition. Seychelles decriminalizing, when was it, 2 years ago, I think? I mean, so what impact does that have on surrounding countries? How do they respond to that?
Not very well. They see it happening and they take it in. I mean, one of the cases that was quoted in the ruling in the Kenyan ruling was the Botswana case. So it does actually affect what's happening around the continent. When something happens in one country, it could happen in another country, as an example. But there's always that whole we are a sovereign state thing. We do not want to be affected by any other country. So that does make a difference. The fact that good things are happening in one state does make a difference in another state.
I recently met a friend that was from Zimbabwe that is going to be challenging the African Supreme Court around the sex registry and the HIV criminalization. Can you touch base on that? Because I'm from Canada and I went through HIV prosecution myself, and I'm in the process of challenging the Canadian Supreme Court on how they find how a person with HIV that's been criminally charged falls under the sex offender registry. In the studies that we did, we didn't find anybody that was malicious or had malicious intent to pass on the virus. So what do you think the outcome or the roadblocks are going to be for Alan to do when he does challenge the Supreme Court in Africa come August, I believe is when he's going to start doing it?
Oh, that's a tough one. I think in most of the African countries, the laws around criminalization of HIV are very vague and they're not actually enforced. But I actually do not know much about the case you're talking about. But one of the challenges is obviously going to be it's going to be on a moral ground, and it's usually that's usually what most of these cases that we bring to court. That's usually what most of them what the state and the other parties challenge us on morality, and it's really who and the question then becomes who actually defines what is moral, who defines what is immoral, and who defines morality, and that's going to be a challenge for them in Zimbabwe. That in my opinion is going to be quite a challenge. Anyone else?
More questions? Hey. Well, maybe about the movement. I don't think I need to ask you if the movement has enough resources. I think we can, if the movement generally has enough resources to challenge to face all the challenges that they're facing. But if you had triple the budget that you have today as an organization, what would you focus on? And then the second question I would have is, where do you see gaps where more resources would be needed generally for the movement? So not for PI specifically, but for the movement across the continent. What is it that they can't do that they want to be doing because of lack of resources, basically?
We need money. If we had triple the budget, I would focus on building up the grassroots organizations, because most often we think and I'm sure most of the people in this space are in such high level organizations, and we focus on what we do as high level organizations, high level advocacy, talking to people in the States and talking to policymakers, but then we often don't think about the people who are actually on the ground. We hardly ever think about that young man in the slum of Zimbabwe, for instance. We never really think about those people. Well, we kind of do, but we don't focus on that. So that would be my target group. We need to actually build those people up. They have very specific issues that they face. They have very specific challenges that they go through. I'll just digress a little bit. When I was attacked, I was attacked by a group of homophobic people in Kenya because I was out as a gay man on TV, and I was outed by the TV interviewer, which was horrible. But when I was attacked, the first thing that came to my mind is, if this could happen to me as an incredibly privileged person, imagine what is happening to the person who does not have access to, say, the taxi that picked me up and took me to the hospital, does not have access to that particular hospital. So that is a focus that is often completely not looked at. So if I had triple the budget, I would really go down into the grassroots. I would go down to people there and find out, what do you need? How can we help you? And not actually designing programs for them, but going out there and find out, okay, so what exactly is happening in your lives and how can we try and make it better?
We heard Elton John say that he was starting up a new organization, the Men's Star, and he was donating $1 billion. Do you think we're going to make him happy and not have him say, why are we still doing the same things? Can that money be implemented to help your programs besides just the Men's Star?
I wish it is. I really wish it is. I don't know if it's actually going to help the grassroots, and that's a difficult conversation to have, really, when you're talking about funding for LGBT organization, funding for HIV. Money doesn't go to the grassroots. Money goes into again. It's a difficult conversation to have. I would love for it to go to people who are actually really need this particular funding. I don't know if it's actually going to go there. So it's up to us to actually do the advocacy for it.
Just one last question. What kind of programs do you have for your frontline workers for when they get burnt out or stressed? Like, do you have something like seeking help for them? Or is there anything for those frontline workers that are actually on the ground and are being traumatized by deaths or prosecutions? What is put into place for those people that are on the ground helping out the people? Like mental health. Is there mental health for you as a frontline worker?
I guess that's why we got. That's why I got that tattoo, because of mental health, and it is. We haven't actually focused on that, and we need to. And it's one of the things that I'm trying, and also coming from this gathering, I'm gonna try and push for in our new strategic plan, that we need to actually work towards mental health for frontline workers. I have burnt out several times. At the conference last month, I almost crashed. So, and again, if this could happen to me, what is happening to the people who are down there, who are working with literally, every single day of their lives is a struggle. So that is something that needs to be focused on, and I will take that on.
I strongly recommend it for what we see in Canada, and we have a young man who suffers from bipolar and PTSD who started a project called the Seeking Help Project, and it was for frontline workers, and I can pass on that information to you, Anthony. It'd be an honor if you guys could get that going, because it's proven and it shows that we do need it. Myself as an advocate on the federal level, meeting with the Premier or meeting with Justice Canada, there's times where I've wanted to walk away so many times, but the way I carry my heart is I will let down the 73,000 people in Canada that look up to me because they know I don't take shit from nobody, and I'm going to hold these policymakers accountable for the things that they hold us back on. I don't know if you've heard me speak before, but I'm at 90 myself. I have my own personal 90. I did a 4-year sentence in Canada for HIV non-disclosure charge. And the PTSD that I go through, it's unbelievable sometimes. So having those programs in place, and like I said, I'm going to emphasize it, please get that implemented. I don't care what kind of roadblocks you're going to run into. You don't take no for an answer, you just effing do it.
Thanks for bringing that up, and it's a really important issue, and I think more and more activists are starting to recognize that it's actually okay to not feel guilty when they look after themselves. So that's actually more sustainable for the movement in the long run if they care about their own well-being as much as they do about other people. There are several initiatives, also the Shelter City initiative in the Netherlands. I mean, it's a small drop in a big ocean, but at least it's an opportunity for human rights defenders to have a breather for a couple of months, to move away from the country, to be in the Netherlands, in one of the 11 cities that is offering this shelter, and then after the breather of a couple of months, go back, or having taken care of themselves and being ready to face whatever they're facing. So I don't know if there are any other questions. Otherwise, I see that we've come up to half an hour. I have no idea how long we are supposed to do this. Lisa, is half an hour the normal timing for this?
Well, yeah, we can take 5 minutes extra.
Okay. Okay. So maybe then for a last question, and it's maybe bringing it back to actually the context of this building and this conference. Anthony, I was just wondering, we've talked about international advocacy, regional advocacy, and how important that is for the African movement. Could you share a little bit with us what is one of the big takeaways for you coming to this conference and going back to your work? What has been most helpful, and what is maybe disappointing, or what are you learning from this that you think like, wow, this needs to be addressed in a different way, or we need to have this more in the front of our agenda?
Taking away from this space is the one thing that I've actually realized is that most of us really work in such a bubble. We focus on just what we do, and we don't actually see the other person. We don't see what I wouldn't have thought about criminalization of HIV in Chad, for instance. I wouldn't have thought about violence within relationships if I hadn't met some people in this space. And that for me is the one big takeaway, that as Pan-Africa ILGA, we work in such a bubble, and we don't look at anything beyond the LGBT stuff yet. Everything is connected. Everything is interconnected, and that's what I will definitely be focusing on. The interconnectedness, the interlinkages, the intersectionality of our struggles. That is the one thing that I'm going to take away from here.
Thank you very much, Anthony, for sharing those wise words and to remind us of the intersectionality as well. So, thank you, and I hope to see you very soon in the future again in our cooperations.
I'm here all week.
Yes, ask him more questions if you were too shy.
All right.